How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Garage Built Baits. I'm your host, Wyatt from BeyerLureCo. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the first time, the first time throwing swim baits, but also my first season throwing swim baits. I would say about 80%, 80 to 85% of my 2023 open water fishing season was throwing strictly bigger baits. So I'm talking like 6-inch like paddle tails up. I have 5-inch paddle tails and like a 5-inch paddle tail swim bait. It's a smaller swim bait, but I'm focusing on like 6 inches and up. That was kind of my focus this year. And had some success, but let's dive into like why I decided to pursue this like side of fishing. This is a very swim baits, even though they're becoming more and more popular, it's like a very niche thing, like super niche just within bass fishing itself and in just like the fishing world in and of itself. But you see a lot of people having success with them. So 2022, end of 2022, kind of winding down my fishing season and going into winter, I was pursuing different media to keep myself occupied while at work. So I was listening to podcasts, and I was listening to the Cast and Crank podcast with Nick, and he was talking with a guy from Swimbaits Underground, and he was talking to Mr. Butch Brown about making a tiny boat, and it was like being donated or given away or something. I don't remember all the parameters of it, but Butch was rigging it up just like how he has his boat. And I was like, oh, this is like really cool. Like, I'm into that. Those tiny boat builds are really cool. Wanted to listen. And then I was listening, and I'm hearing this gentleman, Mr. Butch Brown, talk about fishing big baits in Southern California. And initially, like, I wasn't gravitating towards it because I'm like, oh, that's not really relatable to me because we don't have double-digit fish like in the Midwest where I'm at. And, like, don't get me wrong, you can catch, like, lots of different species that are going to be big, but you're not going to get really any double-digit bass. That's like a 1 in a billion thing. But anyway, I started listening to Mr. Brown more and more, and I was like, I really like this dude. I like where he's coming from. He's funny. He's kind of sassy. I was like, I want to listen to more episodes specifically with this guy. And there was a couple more, and so I was listening and hearing him and how he approaches fishing and how all he throws is like swim baits. He's Mr. Swimbait 24/7. And I was like, okay, that's cool. And then I heard him talk about how his lake breaks down and what these bass, these double-digit bass, what their primary forage is, and it's all these trout that are stocked. And I'm like, well, what the fuck? I was like, there's clear reservoirs in my area, just like Southern California, clear deep water reservoirs. And I'm like, they have trout in them, they have trout stocked in them, and there's also bass in quite a few of these, along with some other things, but we'll get into that. And so I was like, well, man, if that sets up that way, why can't I have success doing that here? And then seeking out other things, and then you see, that I hear about like southern trout eaters and those people throwing big baits for trout over on the East Coast area, and then like looking into different people who are having regular success and different media that I can consume, and found Scales and Tails with Adrian, who's a cool dude. Love what he's doing with his podcast and with his magazine and just in the swim bait community in general. And like, it's a crazy community, but it's still like a super niche thing amongst fishing. Like swim baits are popular and a lot of people are having success with them and they're getting more and more popular and there's more and more baits coming out from what I've seen. And it's like a really exciting time right now. And I feel like I picked a good time to like come into it. But it just all falls back to it's like my water is setting up the same way, kind of how a Southern California reservoir was set up. It seems like there's a lot of similarities. There's also a lot of differences. Over there, they have decent weather year round. They don't have to worry about ice or whatever. And they have F1 and like southern strain bass over there. So different genetics versus Midwest northern strain bass here. And then we have to contend with winter and having 14 inches of ice on the water. And so I was like, there's some differences, but I don't see why this wouldn't work. And so I started seeking out other stuff. I joined Swimbait Universe. I joined Swimbait Universe on Facebook. I joined Swimbait Underground on the forum online. And then looking into people, found Marshall, the homeless fisherman, and I'm like, this dude's legit. This dude's awesome. Instant follow. And when his videos come out, always look forward to them and just love what he's doing. Like, he's honestly living the dream. And then finding other creators like Spice Camp Fish, super cool dude, talk to him a lot, hopefully can have him on the podcast soon. And finding these people that are having success, finding people that are fishing like big swim baits, I was like, this is awesome. And like swim baits always seemed kind of like a novelty. You see like YouTubers post like fishing with like expensive Japanese bait or like fishing with huge swim baits like at Urban Pond or pond hopping swim bait challenge, new swim bait unboxing, super expensive, stuff like that. And I watched, then like when those would come out, I watched them a bit. I watched like when Weston Smith like was getting into swim baits and he had a bunch of different things and seemed like he was really fishing like a working class zero a lot. And then watching some other people like Mr. John B had some stuff, and I think like everybody was kind of doing, like a little bit. And I think like John B never got into it like super hard. He's like kind of all around just a good fisherman, like used a lot of techniques, but I don't think he like ever really like super got into it. And that always just seemed like a novelty because those YouTube videos I feel like were kind of a novelty for them to make as well. And it's like, you're watching somebody throw like a jackal gantarelle and it's like $40 or something, and I'm like, gosh, like that's expensive for a lure. Versus now I'm like, oh, your mind change shifts, so you're like, oh, that's not that bad for a swim bait. Especially like it being plastic. And then I dabbled in swim baits a little bit when I made that rat wake bait back in it was like 2018. I made that rat wake bait and I was like, had success on that, had very good success on that. But it was a light enough like bait that I didn't have to have a special setup for it. But it's still like a good size bait. It's not a small bait by any means. And the first fish that I caught when I moved down to Florida was on that rat wake bait. That was the first bass I caught. It was maybe, like 2 pounds or something like that. It wasn't maybe even a pound and a half. I don't know, those Florida fish are a little different. The ones I caught were never like super fat, but they're always like pretty long. And so I had success with like doing rat wake baits, and I always thought that was cool. I love that. So now it's kind of like dipping my toe in the water back in 2018. And then when I was in Florida, the one bait company specifically is very popular since I think they're based down there, and that's Gambler Lures. They got the Big Easy paddle tails, so I threw that around a lot towards the end of me being there. Didn't get a fish a lot, but I threw that bait around quite a bit. And I didn't nearly fish enough to like have any success on it, but I liked throwing it around because there's always that possibility of catching a big one, especially since like one of the lakes that I like to fish down there. I was talking to this old timer one time, and he was like, "Oh yeah, dude caught a 14-pound bass out of here," and I was like, "Holy shit!" And so that always kind of kept me going to like fish that. Although I'm very thankful that I'm no longer in Florida because I want a kayak, but kind of like the whole gator situation, like it's a little freaky when you're on a kayak, and even when you're fishing from the bank and you're seeing 6-foot plus gators, little unnerving, especially since I feel like those gators are kind of used to like fishing commotion, and so I've almost caught a few alligators, but that's a different story. So let's talk about like my swim baits getting started, and we'll talk about my setup. So for my reel, I had an older Bantam Corrado from Shimano. It's the CU201 left-handed reel, 200 size reel. It's like from the early 2000s. So older reel, had a Gomexus power handle with that thing. That reel is a workhorse. I'm like literally only the second owner of it. The guy that I bought it from was no longer like able to fish as much as he'd liked because of health issues. And he's like, "I haven't used this very much. I bought it brand new, and it's a great condition. And if you want it, it's on sale. I'm selling it right now to help fund other endeavors." And then I was like, well, I'm gonna build a swim bait rod because I don't really want to. I was like, I kind of want this rod like specifically. I want to build a rod that I think that I would like, and kind of what I think I need, that can do a little bit of everything. And so I settled on building a rod on a 7-Eleven heavy mod fast blank from Mudhole Tackle. It's their MHS line of blanks. And then the guides are like their medium duty laser CRB guides, and those have held up really well. I've been impressed with those. I like the performance of those. They're a little pricey too, but they come in a kit. And then, which I thought would just be easy, just having a kit like that for the guides. And then I have a carbon fiber, almost like kind of split grip handle. I like that style. It's full length handle, but like it has a swell, like a dip in the middle. And so I feel like that helps. And it's a very light rod. It is a little tip heavy, but since I'm mainly using baits where I retrieve like tip down, I don't feel like it's an issue. And then recently I got a new reel for it. I upgraded. I got a new Corrado K201, and hopefully I'm going to get a new handle for that here in the near future, just because I like those bigger handles. We'll try a different Gomexus handle. I'm going to try like the flat knobs, see if I like that. And so that's why I set up using 20-pound fluorocarbon P line. I think I'm going to switch next year to 17-pound, either P line or Invisex. I think the P line held up pretty well, but as far as like, I had some instances where I casted off baits, and that really pissed me off. But I think that was more user error, where I should have retied after casting so much, especially around some of the stuff that I was casting around. So that was definitely a my bad situation. And I think that I learned pretty quickly to retie pretty religiously, because I'm very confident in my knot. Always use the San Diego jam for fluorocarbon and mono, so I'm pretty confident in that knot, but I just need to retie more. Especially you're throwing these heavier baits, there's a lot more torque and momentum behind them. So, yeah. But let's talk about some of the first swim baits I had. So, starting out, one of the first, like, trying to get an arsenal going, I ended up signing up for a Rathlon Universe, and I won one of the prizes, which was a 6-inch G2 Punker and a Baka Burrito, a 6-inch Baka Burrito, and a Toxic Baits Frog. And I have none of those baits anymore. All of those got traded off. Didn't really fish them. I traded that Baka for a HUD. Ended up casting off that HUD. It was a 68 special. And then I was able to... I bought some baits as well. I bought a couple Savage Gear baits. I bought like the 3D Shine Glide, like the 5-inch version or something. It was a pretty light bait, honestly. And sold that off later. Never used it. And then I had a 6-inch Pulse Tail Trout. That's like a cool bait, kind of a kind of like a HUD, but I think it fishes like better, faster. And then a 3D Pulse Tail line through bluegill. Haven't even fished that yet. Haven't really fished a ton of bluegill baits. And then when I was starting off, I like bought a Gantarelle, and the dude threw in a knockoff Titan Clash with that, which is actually like pretty cool. Like it's in like a baby bass pattern, which I really like. It's like totally different than the DRT one, but it's like a pretty cool pattern. And dude threw it in for free, so I was like, all right. I know I was a little hesitant on like the TK and the K9 initially, but I've had some good success on the TK, I feel like. And I'll be throwing that a lot more this year, I feel like. And what else did I have initially? A Gantarelle, those Savage Gear baits. Oh, and then I bought the Do It S-Waver clone swim baits. Those are like, 6-inch, like kind of like River to Sea S-Wavers. And so I was like, well, that would be cool, because I can make some videos where I'll paint these and then I'll go and fish them. And I fished my rainbow trout pattern quite a bit and had success on that. And it has a little bit of rash and it has a little bit of teeth marks on it, and it's kind of cool, kind of realizing that bait's not really where it's at as far as baits go. Just fish the shit out of it though this year. And those are kind of like what I had initially. And over the whole year, there's a lot of buy, sell, trade, buy, sell, trade, buy, sell, trade, get myself new stuff, better stuff. And like, I'm pretty excited about that. I'm gonna do a swim bait arsenal video for the main channel, so I can like show what I have right now. And I'm pretty excited for that. So go be on the lookout for that on the BeyerLureCo channel. But my success so far, so the first fish that I got on a swim bait, on a rod that I built, on a bait that I painted, because I was fishing that 6-inch Do It S Waver in that rainbow trout pattern, and I was fishing it at a lake that has bass, has pike, has big trout, and pretty clear water. And I threw it over by these rocks, fishing from the bank, threw it by this big rock pile that gets it's transitioned to like deeper water. And I had this little pike on it, probably like an 18-inch pike, I would say. Not a huge one, kind of just a little snot rocket. And I see it following, and literally the fall before, I had like a 40-inch pike follow a bucktail swim, not a swim bait, a bucktail jig in that I tied. So I see it, and it's following my little S-Waver clone, and I pause it, and I gave it two quick reel inputs, and it darted side to side real quick. And that pike just T-boned it, just crushed it. It was so cool. I was so hyped. And I netted it, and it got all tangled up in my net. And it was like treble hooks flying around and snot rocket pike flying around. And I didn't want to get my hand near that, so I didn't. So I took some pictures of it in the net. It was pretty hype. And then the first bass that I caught was on that same bait at a little, like, shitty town pond one of my coworkers told me about. He's like, oh yeah, there's fish in there. And he's like a trout fisherman. So, like, they stock trout in there for, like, little kids and stuff. But he's like, oh, my girlfriend caught a 24-inch trout in there and yada, 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 and this, that, and the other. I was like, okay, cool. And he's like, oh, there's bass and pike in there too. I'm like, all right, that's kind of more my speed. I was like, I'll take a pike, but I'll also take a bass. Mainly a bass. And it was rainy, and so I had my rain suit on, and I was fished the whole pond from the bank that I could with that S-Waver, and just wasn't having any success. It was kind of a shitty day. Didn't really see any followers or anything. And that was a thing. Fishing swim baits, I've seen so much more fish than I probably would have, because I see a lot of followers. I see a lot of fish like gravitating towards these swim baits. So they have like a ton of drawing power. I've seen like huge trout that I would have never seen if I hadn't have been throwing a big bait and them like, and it just like drawing them in. No commits with the big trout. But I was like, all right. I was getting done. I flipped it in next to a drainage pipe because there's water flowing in because it was raining. So I pushed it there, and I work it across where the current is, and then I'm working it along the bank, like right close to the bank, parallel, and had this little maybe 12-inch bass just hammer it. I think it was more of a territorial, like, get out of my face thing, like aggression, but a catch is a catch. It was like hooks in mouth. I was so hype and was showing off this little bass and hooting and hollering, like showing it off to like the people driving by, and I was like, hell yeah. And I was so hype, and I was wearing my Bad News Bass flat bill, and I'm like, I'm a swim bait fisherman. Like, this is where it's at. I only throw big baits now. And was super hype about it. But as far as like the swim baits go for the year, I haven't caught anything super substantial, I would say. There's only been like one fish that I was like super proud of this year that came on a swim bait. But I also recently got a kayak, and so that kind of changes the game for me as well. And then I caught a tiny bass on a gantarelle fishing from the bank, and I caught a pike on that gantarelle on my kayak fishing a weed line in a transition zone from deep water, and also caught probably like a pound and a half bass on that knockoff tiny clash. And then the biggest bass that I had, I think that's a lot of my catches for the year. Oh no, I caught a couple more pike on that S Waver knockoff that I had. And then my biggest bass of the year came on, and I have a video out of me fishing that day. It's on the BeyerLureCo channel. Go check it out. And so my biggest fish of 2023 came on that Savage Gear pulse tail trout. It's a 6-inch trout imitator. Soft plastic bait, or it's, like silicone or something, but I've always had a lot of success with soft plastics, have a lot of confidence in them versus hard baits. And I was fishing one of these reservoirs or one of these lakes where it's pretty clear, it's pretty deep. There's a lot of drop-offs and deep transition points, and so I was fishing parallel to this area that had a weed line on the bank that transitioned into deeper water. And so I was throwing this parallel to the outside of this weed line, and I just kept going down the bank, fishing parallel like that. Found some success, caught about a 3-pound bass. It was about 3 pounds because it was about an 18-inch fish. I feel like that fish was every bit of 3 pounds. So like a very respectable Midwest bass. Didn't get an official weight on it, so not my PB Midwest bass, but it probably was. And I was pretty hype about it. That was the only fish that I caught that day, and right after I caught that fish, just went right home because I was like, I'm gonna ride this high for as long as I can. I was super stoked about it and was very, very happy. And the next fishing trip is when I casted off that bait at a different lake and should have retied. Like right after I caught that fish, should have retied. And like all the pike that I caught, I retie right after, or I'll check my line right after. But that was one of the biggest things that I learned is retie. And I say that, like other people that fish swim baits a lot, they say that a lot. Retie. So transitioning into kind of how my lake's set up and the different species of fish in them. So where I'm in the Black Hills, like it is mostly a trout fishing haven. And I'm going to go as far as to say it's one of the most underrated trout fisheries in the United States. I'm going to go as far as to say that. And actually, if you want to come trout fishing with me specifically, we can do that if you go to my link, my Airbnb experience link, and you can book a trip with me. It's going to start in the spring, literally right after ice out, after I, get my life together and everything with getting my new fishing license and whatnot. But it'll start right after ice out. That'll be one of the perfect times to go. It'll go through summer. Summer's kind of a trashy time to fish for trout, just because it's harder, and that warm water is like pretty hard on them as well. But definitely go check out the link. But as far as like my fisheries go, there's a lot of trout. There's a lot of places that stock trout. We have brook trout, brown trout, rainbow trout. There's a couple fisheries with that stock cutthroat trout, which will be interesting this year to pursue. There's a fishery around me that stocks tiger trout. There's 2 reservoirs around me that stock lake trout. There's a lot of fisheries around me that have pike. There's a couple fisheries that have smallmouth around me, which will be really, I pursued a couple of times this past summer unsuccessfully. Haven't yet to catch a smallmouth. That'd be cool. A lot of these fisheries have pike, and a fair number of these fisheries have largemouth bass, which is going to be, my primary target. And there's also a couple of fisheries around me that have walleye in them, which the Midwest goes absolutely apeshit over walleye. And I've seen actually a couple people on the swimbait underground forums have success pursuing walleye with swimbaits, which is really cool. They have a pattern figured out. They have times of year figured out. I think that'd be really cool. I think if I was to do that, I would probably throw I have not had a ton of success with walleye fishing. It's not really my thing. And this year, hopefully, I'm going to be going to Lake Oahe and fishing with one of my buddies and his brother that came out. They came out and went fly fishing for trout. Went with them one time. It was a hell of a great experience. And so I'll want to go and fish for smallmouth and walleye and pike with them on Lake Oahe. I think that'd be fun. Hopefully this spring. Make a trip out of it. Because I see soft plastics working pretty well for walleye. Throwing a mag draft or something. But some of my goals that I want to do is I want to catch a trout on a swim bait. So I'm looking to get a depths 115. There's this guy next state over in Wyoming that has a lot of success fishing swim baits for trout, which is really cool. And there's definitely trophy sized trout in my area. The biggest trout that I caught was 20 inches, and that was just right at the tail end here. So I have a couple smaller size swim baits for trout that I want to try out. And some of the biggest baits that I have this year, I want to use quite a few of as well. I have a 7.8-inch paddle tail swim bait, just a big bulky lure. But it's really cool. It's a Epic Boss from Epic Bait Molds in collaboration with Nate Marling, and threw that a couple times and had some follows on it by some smaller bass, which is really interesting. And that was a pretty cool bait to fit. It's a pretty cool bait to fish. And then I have a 6 Cents Draw, the 9-inch one, and repainted that in a rainbow trout pattern. That video is coming out this Friday. And I have a couple other baits that I'm really excited to throw this year. But a lot of my water sets up, it's more clear water. There's usually sets up there's pretty deep transitions, it looks like, looking at lake maps and whatnot, trying to planning stuff out before I go out. But I'm pretty excited for it. So these lakes set up, they're deeper, have clear water, which is perfect for glide bait fishing. And they usually tend to be a little bit colder. So I think there's going to be situations where slower glide baits are going to work very well. I think my game plan going into this spring for ice out, for bass, trout, and pike is going to be slower baits, really slow baits, try to trigger something. I have a Roman made negotiator. Just gonna fish that wide and slow. And I have some, no big HUDs, but I have some 6-inch HUDs, and I have a couple 68 specials, and just fish those slow and kind of like increase like my cadence as, it starts to warm up and the fish start to warm up and they get a little more fired up. So I'm pretty excited for this new upcoming year, and I'm very excited to be able to access more water with the kayak that I have. And the kayak already has some Swimbait stickers on it. I gotta throw the Swimbait Underground sticker on it, and so people know what I'm about. But going out and like interacting with people while I'm fishing these big swim baits has like been interesting. I have not had somebody. I'm kind of disappointed because I have not had somebody say, "What, are you gonna catch a shark with that thing?" When I had a K9, this lady with marble red hanging out of her mouth, she was like, "Wow, that looks like a fish." It's a big 9-inch bait, and she has her marble red hanging out of her mouth, fishing her worm and bobber. Kids around her fishing her worm and bobber, and I'm like, yeah, this is a big bait. This is a pretty cool bait. I'm not going to tell you how much I paid for this, or not even how much I paid because I got a hell of a deal on it. I'm not going to tell you what this bait is worth because people would legitimately think that I'm insane. But like another dude was like, "Oh," because I was fishing a HUD, and this dude was like, "Oh, that's really realistic." He's like, "Yeah, oh wow, look at that. That thing is cool." And this other dude, well, he really liked the Fall of '74 bait wraps that I had my baits in. He's like, "Oh, those are really cool." And I'm like, "Yeah, I like them because I just throw a couple baits in and I can be on my way." Because I was like, I'm only gonna fish, a couple baits. I'm not gonna bring my whole tackle box. And he was pretty impressed with the bait wraps, and then I was showing him some of the baits, and he thought those were cool. And I'm like, yeah, this is what, because he's like, well, I want to go after pike, even though he caught like a 20-inch trout. He's like, well, I kind of want to go after pike. He didn't really have the right setup to go after a pike, but I wasn't gonna tell him any different. And I was like, oh yeah, like was showing him the 6-inch like bait that I painted and the trout pattern, and I'm like, yeah, they're gonna be like going after like some of the stuff like this, or like, other stuff like big spoons, spinner baits, things of that nature, like bigger jerk baits, things like that. And he was like, oh yeah, that's cool. And yeah, so I've had pretty positive interactions with people on the water, but definitely my goals for this year is I want to catch a pike over 30 inches. Just like, did not do that this year. But I also want to fish more this year as well. So I want to catch a pike over 30. I want to catch just a monster. And I want to catch a trout on a swim bait. Something that's like a glide bait or like a bigger soft plastic swim bait, because I don't think those 6-inch HUDs, or not the 6-inch HUDs, the like 6-inch mag drafts, I don't think those are too terribly big. And I have one kind of in a trout pattern, like it's like more a shiner pattern, but it's kind of got some pink hue to it, so it's like kind of trouty. So I want to catch a trout on a swim bait, and it doesn't matter what kind of trout, because like if I catch a rainbow, awesome. If I catch a brown trout, even awesomer. If I catch a huge brook trout, even awesomer. If I catch a lake trout on a swim bait, I will absolutely lose my fucking mind. I will like literally shit a brick. I'd be so excited. And I and really looking forward to this year. And it's going to be quite a polar opposite year because it's going to be BFS fishing, because that's going to be my main focus when I'm fishing like tiny streams for trout. And it's going to be like swimbait fishing when I'm fishing larger bodies of water for anything is willing to bite something that's on the bigger side. Anything that wants to eat that New York strip. But I'm pretty excited to see where this year goes. I am just confirming the final details with my man Trevor Spice Can't Fish for our podcast episode. Got a webcam coming in, pretty excited about it. So hopefully one of the next episodes that you will see a guest, and you will see us being able to interact with each other and have a conversation, which I'm pretty excited for. So thank you so much for listening. If you do want to support the podcast, you can always use that Buy Me a Coffee link and buy me a coffee. That'd be cool. That will actually just go into production costs of the podcast. So like, it's gonna go just right back into the channel, making improvements on it, maybe get a better microphone, better setup, and go into being able to produce more content for you guys. So that would be super exciting because I love doing this. But anyway, hope you guys have a good one. We'll see you for the next one.